So in this section, we're trying out a little bit of a different view. You get to see my plant, my little dinosaur prop here, as well as my iPad. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to be going over some hand gestures and things like that. And I thought for these two early lessons, it's just going to be easier for you to see what I'm doing if you can actually see my hands. And then in the lessons after that, it's just going to be a screen so you can see exactly what's happening in the interface really crispy and really easily. So in the last section, we talked about the gallery and all the things we can do in the gallery. In this section, we have created a new document and we can start drawing. Now, you've probably already used Procreate a little bit on your own before this. Maybe you've used it a lot on your own before this, but it's pretty easy to use. You just take your pencil or your finger and you start drawing. Simple. But there are a bunch of tools in here and kind of tucked away. And so this one is an overview of the basic tools. And then each section going forward, we're going to be doing a deep dive into some of the tools and all the things we can do with them and then using them on a project by project basis. So first things first, we have our gallery button in the upper left-hand corner. So if we tap on that, it'll take us back to the gallery. And of course, if we tap on an image, it's going to take us back to the image. And then we have a bunch of tools, and there's so much tucked away in Procreate in these tools. We're going to be using this little wrench icon quite a bit. And inside it, there are these different tabs that we can go through that allow us to do everything from preferences to adding text to using grids and all sorts of different stuff. And this is where a lot of the power of Procreate is kind of tucked away. After that, we have our adjustments. So we can change the opacities of things. We could add blurs. So I'm going to slide this and blur out my text. Maybe just make it a little bit blurry. You get the idea. I'm going to reset that. But there's a lot of things and adjustments that we're going to be covering throughout the course as well. We've got a selection tool. It's going to do a lot of different things. I'll just freehand select this. And now that word hello is selected. And if we wanted to, we could then use the next tool, our arrow tool, to move around our element, which also comes in handy. Over here we have our brushes, which is basically what we're going to be using throughout the course. I'm going to say this a couple times. My iPad Pro I've had for a while. I've imported a lot of brushes. I'm going to have a lot of brushes that you don't have. Now I'm going to try to only use brushes in these lectures that come natively with Procreate, so you don't have to purchase anything extra here. But just so you know, if you see some brushes in my brush palette that you don't have, that's okay. That just means I've gotten them extra, and I'll make sure that I point those things out. And I'll also be talking about how to import and brushes and things like that in a later lesson. It's really easy to do. Then we have our smudge tool, which works a lot like our brush tool, where if we take our brush tool, we can lay down a line. Well, our smudge tool allows us to then smudge that brush or smudge those lines using a brush. So if we double tap on that, we can smudge with any texture or any brush that we can draw with. The eraser works in a similar way. We can tap on that, I can come in here and I could start erasing. And the eraser, just like the brush and the smudge tool, allows you to erase with different textures as well. So I can erase with that stucco texture too. Then over here we have our layers. So if I open that up, right now I only have one layer. I can always add another layer. And then when I go over here, let me grab a pencil, maybe a different color, and I draw on top of that layer. If I decide, you know what, I didn't want that, I can always toggle off that layer. Really nice feature. If you're new to drawing programs, we're going to be doing a deep dive into that. If you've been around drawing programs forever, you're probably familiar with how layers work. There's a lot of stuff tucked into these layer settings. And then lastly is this little circle over here. These are our color swatches. This is where we're going to live and breathe. There are tabs on this as well, so we can change the way that our color works. We can add manual values. We can save palettes, things like that. So there's a whole section on how we're going to be using the color palette as well. Let's go over to this left-hand side of the screen over here. Let's go over here to this left-hand side of the screen over here. What we have is we have a slider which changes our brush size. Wait, can you see that? Our brush gets bigger. We're drawing with a big brush. I slide it down, brush gets smaller. I'm drawing with a smaller brush. Handy stuff. This is the opacity. So this is obviously full opacity. Let me shrink that up. And this is, a percentage of that. Next up, let's look over here on our left-hand side. We have two things. This first thing over here adjusts our brush size. So if I slide it up, I get a bigger brush. Oops, let me get it from an angle here so you can see it. If I slide it down, it's small, and it gives you a little preview of the size that you need. So really big brush. Really small brush. Let me move it up to the middle there. This is the opacity, and this affects different brushes differently. So if I move the opacity all the way down, what do we get? We get an opaque brush that you can kind of see through when you're drawing with it. And this little button in the middle is a modifier button. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit because there's a lot of hand gestures and things like that. So know that that modifier is there, and that's going to come in handy when we take a look at some of the preferences and shortcuts. And then the last thing that's kind of worth knowing here is that there is a back button. So if you want to undo, there is a physical button that lets you do that. And underneath it, there's a redo button, so we can tap on that to redo what we just did. So in a nutshell, that's the interface. It's super simple. Anybody can create a canvas, grab a brush, and start drawing. But you can do so much more in Procreate, and that's really what this course is about, is diving into all of these little sections and finding all the cool tools and accessories that the makers of Procreate have hidden away. So, in the next section, I'm going to be talking about hand gestures, because that's another thing that makes it a lot of fun to draw in this program. And then, we're going to get on to drawing.